The chronicle of the two thrones begins with the hollow silence of a homecoming turned to ash. After the harrowing odyssey through the island of time, where the Prince of Persia defied the Dahaka, he believes he has finally severed the threads of his cursed destiny. Beside him on his vessel stands Kylena, the Empress of Time, a woman whose existence was once a prerequisite for the creation of the sands, but whom the prince has pulled from the brink of non-existence. They sail toward the majestic docks of Babylon, the prince's heart swelling with the hope of redemption. He envisions the golden gates of his father's kingdom and the relief of laying down his sword. However, as the silhouette of the great city emerges, the dream shatters. Babylon is a vision of hell. The sky is choked with the black smoke of 1,000 fires, and the screams of the dying carry across the water. The lore of this opening sequence centers on the temporal paradox created by the prince's actions. By traveling into the past and preventing the sands of time from ever being forged, the prince effectively erased the timeline of the first game. In this new reality, the treacherous vizier was never slain because the prince and the Maharaja never discovered the hourglass. Consequently, the vizier has spent these years festering in ambition, eventually launching a brutal invasion of Babylon to claim the treasures of King Shahriman. The prince's ship is intercepted by siege engines before it can dock. In the chaos of the sinking vessel, Kylena is captured by the vizier's soldiers, and the prince is cast into the harbor. He washes ashore on the rocks of the lower city, realizing that in his quest to change his own fate, he has inadvertently doomed his entire people. As the prince infiltrates the burning city, the architecture of Babylon reflects a civilization in the midst of a violent transition. The streets are now a labyrinth of barricades and mass graves. The lore emphasizes that this prince is a man hardened by years of running. He is a cynical warrior who sees the world through the lens of survival. He witnesses the vizier's sand-wrought army, soldiers mutated by the first leaks of the sands, rounding up survivors. The prince's objective is to reach the palace and rescue Kylena, but he is slowed by the sight of his father's kingdom being dismantled. He finds the streets filled with the wailing of the Magi, a spiritual distress that permeates the atmosphere. The very soul of Babylon is being drained to feed the vizier's hunger for godhood. The narrative reaches a critical juncture when the prince finally reaches the palace courtyard, only to find himself a helpless spectator. He watches as the vizier executes Kylena with the dagger of time. Her death acts as the ultimate catalyst. Because she is the Empress of Time, her blood is the raw material of the sands. As she falls, the sands of time are released with a violent explosion of golden light. This is not the refined sand of the past. It is a corrupted force of nature. The vizier stabs himself with the dagger, absorbing the sands and transforming into an immortal, winged monstrosity known as Zervan. The blast wave catches the prince, throwing him into the crumbling pits of the palace. During the fall, a jagged dagger-tail chain becomes fused into the prince's left arm, acting as a conductor for the corrupted sands that now enter his bloodstream. This moment marks the birth of the Dark Prince, the core psychological theme of the lore. The infection in the prince's arm is a spiritual gateway. The sands speak to him as a cynical voice echoing his own worst impulses. The Dark Prince represents his resentment toward his father, his bloodlust, and his conviction that the world owes him everything. This internal antagonist serves as a constant reminder of the prince's fall. While the prince wants to save his city, the Dark Prince wants to rule its ruins. The lore of the two thrones refers to this struggle, the throne of a righteous king versus the throne of a dark tyrant. The prince must navigate the sewers while battling this darkness, which transforms him into a charcoal-skinned wraith whenever his desperation peaks. Furthermore, the lore of the broken lineage is explored as the prince discovers the body of King Shahriman. In this timeline, the king died defending the gates, never knowing his son had returned. The prince's grief is compounded by the fact that he is a ghost in his own home. To the people of Babylon, he is a stranger who brought the storm with him. This isolation is a key narrative driver. The prince is forced to confront the reality that his heroism was often a selfish pursuit of survival. To save Babylon, he cannot simply be a warrior. He must become a symbol of hope. This sets the stage for his reunion with Farah, the Princess of India, who is also a prisoner in this reality. Their relationship, built on deleted memory, becomes the emotional anchor, as the prince must earn the trust of a woman who has every reason to fear the darkness within him. The first act concludes with the prince emerging from the subterranean depths, standing on a balcony overlooking the burning metropolis. The dark prince mocks his tears and urges him to embrace the power of the sands to crush the vizier. The prince, however, looks at his father's sword and the distant silhouette of the Tower of Babel. He realizes that the path ahead is a pilgrimage of atonement. The architecture of the city is now a cage that he must break from the inside out. The sands of time are no longer just a tool to undo mistakes. They are a poison he must either master or be consumed by. The journey toward the heart of the vizier's empire has begun, and the prince must walk the razor's edge between his humanity and the monstrous power in his veins. The air in Babylon is thick with the scent of ozone and ancient dust, a reminder that the laws of time are being rewritten. The prince's movement is shadowed by the ghostly laughter of his darker half, the heartbeat of this fractured reality. He is a man with two souls, two legacies, and two thrones vying for his future. As he leaps into the darkness of the next district, the legend of the Prince of Persia enters its final chapter, where the greatest enemy is not the god king on the tower, but the man staring back from the reflection in the sands. The stage is set for a battle that will determine whether time itself will be a river of life or a desert of eternal shadow. The second chapter of this fractured chronicle begins in the claustrophobic darkness of the Babylonian sewers, where the prince is forced to confront the duality of his existence. Having survived the collapse of the palace, he finds himself navigating the city's underbelly, a place where the stench of decay is masked by the metallic tang of the sands. It is here that the Dark Prince fully manifests, no longer just a whisper but a distinct, parasitic consciousness. The lore of the Dark Prince is deeply tied to the nature of ambition. He is the embodiment of the prince's survival at any cost, a creature of shadow who views morality as a shackle. Physically, the infection causes the prince to mutate into a wraith-like form, his skin hardening into obsidian and his arm wielding the dagger tail with a savage, whip-like fluidity. This transformation is fueled by the sands. Without a constant intake of the golden essence, the Dark Prince's form withers, forcing the prince into a desperate, unending hunt for more power. As the prince ascends from the depths into the city's industrial districts, he encounters a ghost of his forgotten past, Farah. In this timeline, she is a fierce commander of the Indian resistance, having been captured by the vizier's forces. The lore of their meeting is defined by the absence of memory. The prince looks at her with the eyes of a man who has lived a lifetime by her side, but to Farah, he is merely a gritty, suspicious warrior who smells of the sands. She is hunting the vizier for the destruction of her own kingdom, and her presence creates a profound conflict for the prince. The Dark Prince urges him to kill her or use her as bait, arguing that she is a distraction from his vengeance. However, the prince finds that in her presence, his darker impulses are easier to suppress. Farah becomes the light that keeps the infection from reaching his heart, even as she remains unaware of the role she played in the world that no longer exists. The architecture of the city's midsection, the mechanical towers, serves as a metaphor for the vizier's cold, calculating nature. These towers were once wonders of Babylonian engineering, used to track the stars and manage the city's irrigation. Now they have been repurposed into execution engines, where the vizier's lieutenants, the gatekeepers, oversee the slaughter of the populace. The prince must master the art of stealth to navigate these areas, a necessity born from his weakened physical state and the overwhelming numbers of the Sand Army. The lore emphasizes that while the Dark Prince excels in open combat, the Light Prince must rely on the wisdom of his father's teachings to survive. This duality creates a rhythmic cycle in the narrative. The prince moves through the shadows with grace and precision, only to erupt into a whirlwind of shadow fire when the Dark Prince takes control. A pivotal moment in this district occurs when the prince and Farah are forced to work together to lower a massive drawbridge. During this sequence, the prince's cynical exterior begins to crack. He finds himself instinctively protecting Farah, repeating maneuvers they perfected in a timeline she cannot remember. This echo of the soul suggests that some bonds are deeper than the flow of time. However, the Dark Prince is always there to remind him of the truth, that their bond was built on a lie and ended in a tragedy he cannot undo. The lore of the two thrones becomes more literal here. The prince realizes that to sit on the throne of Babylon, he must first conquer the throne of his own mind. He begins to see that his father, King Shahriman, was not just a king of stone and gold, but a king of character, a standard the prince feels increasingly unable to meet. The environment of Babylon continues to mutate under the influence of the sands. The market districts, once vibrant and full of life, are now patrolled by the illusionists, sand creatures that can teleport and manipulate the perception of their prey. The lore of these enemies reveals the vizier's mastery over the temporal element. He is not just changing the present, he is thinning the walls of reality itself. The prince discovers that the more he relies on the Dark Prince's power, the more the world around him begins to look like a nightmare. The colors desaturate, the sounds distort into low-frequency growls, and the architecture seems to bend under the weight of his own corruption. This visual storytelling reinforces the idea that the darkness is not an outside force, but a perspective that changes how the prince interacts with his world. The chapter culminates in a confrontation with Klampa, a former Babylonian general who has been transformed into a mountain of sand and iron. This battle takes place in the city's grand arena, once a place of sport and celebration, now a slaughterhouse. The lore of the Klampa fight is a test of the prince's reclaimed heroism. For the first time, he isn't just fighting for himself. He is fighting in front of the hidden eyes of his people. By defeating the giant, he sends a signal to the survivors that the prince has returned. But the victory is hollow. As the giant falls, the Dark Prince's voice grows louder, claiming the credit and demanding that the prince execute the surviving soldiers to finish the job. The prince resists, but the strain of the struggle is visible on his face, a sign that the war for his soul is far from over. As the sun begins to set over the burning spires of Babylon, the prince and Farah stand on the edge of the royal gardens. The path to the vizier is clear, but the prince is more divided than ever. He is a man who loves a woman who doesn't know him, a prince of a kingdom that is being ground into sand, and a host to a monster that wants to consume him. The lore of the two thrones is no longer a legend of the past. It is the reality of his every heartbeat. He looks at his infected arm, the golden veins glowing in the twilight, and wonders if there will be anything left of the man he once was by the time he reaches the top of the tower. The journey continues, but the shadows are growing longer, and the Dark Prince is beginning to smile. The third movement of the lore takes place within the royal workshops and the hanging gardens, a vertical labyrinth where the industrial might of Babylon meets its most decadent botanical wonders. This district serves as a physical manifestation of the vizier's corruption of Babylonian progress. The workshops, once the birthplace of the kingdom's greatest inventions, have been converted into flesh forges, where the vizier's alchemists experiment with the infusion of sands into living subjects. The architecture here is a brutalist blend of grinding gears and steam-powered elevators, all powered by the glowing, pressurized sands. The lore of the workshops introduces the concept of the agony of the machine, the idea that the vizier has stripped the soul from the city's industry, replacing human craftsmanship with mindless, automated destruction. For the prince, navigating these halls is a test of his mechanical intuition, forcing him to solve complex environmental puzzles that mirror the fractured state of his own mind. The central antagonists of this chapter are the twin warriors, the vizier's personal executioners. One carries a massive, curved sword, the axe, while the other wields a lethal, bladed chain, the sword. In the lore of the two thrones, the twins represent the ultimate symmetry of shadow. They move in perfect unison, a dark reflection of the partnership the prince is trying to build with Farah. Their combat style is designed to exploit any gap in the prince's defense, requiring him to focus on the rhythmic flow of the battle rather than brute force. The battle against the twins occurs within a circular arena of fire, a symbolic representation of the Ring of Fate. As the prince fights them, the Dark Prince taunts him, claiming that a true king would simply burn the arena down with everyone in it. This confrontation is a pivotal lore moment. The prince must reject the Dark Prince's solo power and instead rely on the strategic timing he has learned from his failures on the Island of Time. The transition into the Hanging Gardens provides a jarring shift in the narrative's atmosphere. The gardens, one of the ancient wonders of the world, are now a dying paradise. The whitewood trees are turning to obsidian, and the waters of life that once flowed through the aqueducts have been replaced by a slow-moving, golden sludge of liquefied sand. The lore of the gardens focuses on the suffocation of beauty. Under the vizier's rule, nature itself is being taxed and drained. As the prince and Farah traverse the high trellises and precarious balconies, the dialogue between them deepens. Farah begins to notice the prince's constant murmuring to himself, his internal battles with the Dark Prince, and her suspicion grows into a genuine fear. She asks him about his past, and the prince's inability to tell the truth without sounding like a madman creates a wall of silence between them. The lore suggests that the prince's greatest burden is not the infection, but the knowledge of a history he cannot share. A significant lore revelation occurs at the altar of the ancestors, a secluded grove within the gardens dedicated to the previous kings of Babylon. Here, the prince finds a statue of his father, King Shahraman, that has been defaced by the Sand Army. This sight triggers a violent reaction from the Dark Prince, who views the king's legacy as a weakness that led to the city's fall. However, the Light Prince sees it as a beacon of responsibility. He begins to understand that a king's duty is to be the foundation for his people, not the ceiling. This realization allows him to tap into a new level of focus, temporarily silencing the Dark Prince's mocking voice. The lore of the altar emphasizes that the prince is finally beginning to mourn his father as a son, rather than just a soldier. This emotional vulnerability is what allows Farah to see a glimpse of the man beneath the scars, momentarily softening her stance toward him. The journey through the gardens also introduces the Mahasti, the vizier's lead assassin and the architect of the palace siege. She is a master of the sands of velocity, able to move so quickly she appears to be in multiple places at once. Her battle with the prince is a high-speed chase through the crumbling gazebos of the upper gardens. The lore of Mahasti is a warning about the cost of speed. She has sacrificed her physical stability and her sanity for the ability to outrun time itself. When the prince finally corners her, he is forced to transform into the Dark Prince to match her speed. This transformation is the most violent scene thus far. He becomes a whirlwind of chain and shadow, a sight that Farah witnesses with pure horror. The lore of this moment is the shattered trust. Although the prince kills Mahasti and saves Farah, the look of revulsion on Farah's face is a wound that no sands can heal. The act concludes at the Great Lift, a massive platform that leads toward the royal palace's inner sanctum. The mood is somber. The prince has reclaimed the gardens, but he has lost the tenuous connection he was building with Farah. The Dark Prince is triumphant, laughing at the prince's misery and reminding him that monsters do not have friends. The lore of the lift symbolizes the prince's final ascent into the lion's denver. He is no longer just fighting to save Babylon. He is fighting to prove to Farah and to himself that he is still a man. The architecture of the palace looms above them, a golden cage filled with the vizier's divine ambitions. The prince looks at his father's sword, now glowing with a faint, internal light, and realizes that the hardest part of the journey is not the enemies he faces, but the man he has to become to defeat them. The lore of Part 3 serves as the crucible of the spirit. It is where the prince's physical prowess is at its peak, but his emotional state is at its most fragile. The Hanging Gardens, once a symbol of life, have become a graveyard of dreams, and the prince is the only one who can decide if the next morning will bring a new season or an eternal winter. He steps onto the lift, the chain on his arm rattling like a funeral bell, ready to face the ghosts of the palace and the god who waits at the summit. The fourth movement of the chronicle descends into the ruined palace of Babylon and the subterranean tombs, a journey that serves as the prince's dark night of the soul. The palace, once the seat of Persian sovereignty, is now a fractured shell, its gold leaf peeling away to reveal the raw, corrupted stone beneath. In the lore of the two thrones, the palace represents the heart of the kingdom, and its desecration by the vizier's sand army signifies the total collapse of the old order. As the prince and Farah navigate the collapsing throne room and the shattered banquet halls, the environment itself seems to remember the prince's father. The lore of the shattered throne is introduced here, the idea that the physical seat of power is nothing without the spiritual weight of the man who occupies it. The prince's struggle is no longer merely about survival. It is about reclaiming the dignity of his bloodline from the shadow that has consumed it. The psychological war within the prince reaches its most feverish intensity during the traversal of the Well of Secrets. As the prince moves through the dark prince becomes increasingly aggressive. His voice no longer just a whisper, but a cacophony of doubt and malice. He mocks the prince's grief, calling his father's death a mercy, and suggesting that the prince should thank the vizier for clearing the path to the throne. The lore of the psychic parasite is explored here. The Dark Prince is not an external demon, but the concentrated essence of the prince's own ego. He represents the seduction of the void, the belief that the only true freedom is found in the absence of responsibility. This internal conflict is mirrored in the gameplay, as the prince is forced to switch between forms with increasing frequency, illustrating a mind that is literally being torn apart by its own contradictions. The turning point of the entire trilogy occurs in the Chamber of the King, deep within the palace's lower levels. It is here that the prince finds the body of his father, King Shahraman. In the previous games, the king was an unreachable figure of authority, but here he is a silent, fallen warrior. The lore of this moment is the passing of the mantle. Beside the king lies his sword, a weapon of legendary Persian craftsmanship, forged from a metal that resonates with the purity of the sun. The Dark Prince tries to prevent the prince from taking the weapon, fearing its radiant energy. However, as the prince grips the hilt, the corruption in his arm momentarily recedes. The sword acts as a spiritual anchor, a physical link to the honor and wisdom of the man the prince once sought to surpass. By taking up his father's blade, the prince stops being a wanderer and finally accepts his role as the rightful king of Babylon. The discovery of the sword changes the dynamic between the prince and Farah. Seeing him honor his father's memory allows Farah to see the nobility that the sands have been trying to erase. However, this reconciliation is short-lived. The vizier, sensing the prince's renewed resolve, triggers a massive collapse of the palace's foundation. The lore of the Great Descent describes a journey into the city's ancient foundations, where the prince and Farah are separated. The prince is cast into the pit of silence, a place where the sands are so thick they muffle all sound. In this isolation, the Dark Prince tries his most desperate gambit, attempting to convince the prince that Farah has abandoned him and that his father's sword is a useless toy. The lore of the pit is the trial of faith, where the prince must choose to believe in the unseen light of his allies despite the overwhelming darkness of his immediate surroundings. As the prince fights his way back toward the surface, he encounters the Sandwraiths, elite guards who serve as the physical manifestations of the vizier's fear. These enemies are silent, relentless, and move with a spectral grace. The lore suggests that these are not just soldiers, but temporal echoes, remnants of warriors from the timelines the prince has destroyed. This adds a layer of cosmic guilt to the prince's journey. He is literally cutting through the consequences of his own past mistakes to reach his future. The environment of the lower palace is a nightmare of shifting sands and temporal rifts, where doors lead to rooms that haven't been built yet or to ruins that have been gone for centuries. The prince's mastery of his father's sword becomes essential, as its light is the only thing that can stabilize the reality around him. The chapter culminates at the base of the high tower, where the prince finally reunites with Farah. Their conversation here is the emotional climax of the act. The prince, humbled by the sight of his father's death and the weight of the sword, finally speaks to Farah with honesty, though he still cannot tell her the whole truth of their past. The lore of the high tower represents the final ascent. Above them lies the vizier and the culmination of the sand's power, Below them lies the ruin of everything the prince once held dear. The prince realizes that the two thrones are not just symbols of power, but choices of how to face the end of the world. He chooses to climb not for himself, but for the memory of the king and the safety of the woman who has become his conscience. The act ends with the prince and Farah stepping onto the spiral ramp of the Tower of Babel. The air is charged with the energy of the vizier's ritual, and the ground beneath them is no longer stone, but solidified sand. The Dark Prince is silent, lurking in the deep recesses of the prince's mind, waiting for the final moment of weakness. The lore of Part 4 is the death of the scavenger and the birth of the king. The prince has found his weapon, his purpose, and his partner. Now, all that remains is the long climb into the heart of the storm, where the destiny of the sands and the fate of Babylon will finally be decided. The fifth movement of the chronicle takes place within the High Tower of Babylon, a dizzying vertical ascent that transcends the physical world and enters the realm of metaphysical nightmare. The tower, under the vizier's influence, has become a temporal loom, where the past, present, and future of the city are being unraveled and rewoven into a monument for the dark god Zervan. The architecture here defies the laws of gravity. Massive stone slabs float in the golden haze of the sands, and the wind carries the distorted whispers of those already consumed by the ritual. The lore of the High Tower describes it as the stairway to nihilism. As the prince climbs, he is not just fighting soldiers, he is fighting the weight of time itself. The Dark Prince is at his most desperate and vitriolic here, sensing that the completion of the prince's journey will mean his own destruction. He tries to lure the prince into a state of total despair, arguing that even if they defeat the vizier, the world is too broken to ever truly heal. The ascent is punctuated by the vizier's illusions, a series of psychological trials designed to break the prince's spirit. The vizier manifests as a giant, winged silhouette in the storm, casting shadows that take the form of the prince's past failures. He sees the sultan's palace in ruins, the face of the Dahaka, and the tragic end of Kylina. The lore of these illusions explores the concept of temporal guilt, the idea that the prince is a man without a home in time. The vizier taunts him with the fact that he is a ghost, a man whose greatest deeds were erased from history. To overcome these trials, the prince must rely on the sword of Shahriman. Its radiant light acts as a truth seeker, cutting through the vizier's lies and stabilizing the prince's perception of reality. The lore emphasizes that the sword is not just a weapon of iron, but a symbol of the legacy of truth that the vizier can never hope to corrupt. A major lore event occurs at the summit of the Inner Sanctum, where the prince is briefly reunited with Farah. They find the vizier's ritual at its terrifying peak, with the captive population of Babylon being transformed into a literal sea of sand to fuel his godhood. However, before the prince can strike, the vizier unleashes a massive wave of temporal energy that casts the prince into the mental realm, the abyss of the self. This is a surreal, dreamlike dimension that exists entirely within the prince's own mind. The architecture here is a chaotic blend of every location the prince has ever visited, from the temples of India to the fortresses of the Island of Time. This is the Dark Prince's domain, where the shadow finally reveals its true plan, to permanently replace the prince and claim the third throne for itself. The lore of the mental realm is a deep dive into the prince's psyche. There are no traditional enemies here. Instead, the prince must navigate a world of shifting platforms and echoes of his own voice. The Dark Prince manifests as a physical entity, stalking the prince through the ruins of his memories. He argues that he is the true prince, the one who did the hard work of surviving while the Light Prince hid behind his father's honor. The lore of the Shadow's claim is that the darkness is the only honest part of humanity. To escape this realm, the prince must undergo a spiritual decoupling. He realizes that he cannot kill the shadow, because to fight it is to feed it. The only way to win is to stop engaging in the struggle entirely. This represents the ultimate act of self-mastery, the prince choosing to be defined by his actions in the light rather than his fears in the dark. While the prince is trapped within his mind, the physical world reaches its breaking point. Farah, left alone on the tower, attempts to disrupt the vizier's concentration. The lore of Farah's defiance highlights her role as the true hero of this timeline. She is a woman who fights for a world she barely understands, against a god she cannot hope to defeat, purely because it is the right thing to do. Her bravery serves as the beacon that helps the prince find his way out of the mental abyss. He realizes that he is not fighting for his own throne, but for the right of people like Farah to exist without being pawns in a god's game. This shift from self-preservation to selfless sacrifice is what finally breaks the Dark Prince's hold over his spirit. The chapter concludes with the prince awakening on the highest platform of the tower, the apex of Zervan. He is no longer transforming. The charcoal skin and the golden veins are gone, replaced by the steady, calm resolve of a man who has finally integrated his shadow. Beside him, Farah is being held by the vizier's massive, golden wings. The lore of the final dawn begins here. The storm has cleared at the summit, revealing a sky of burning gold and the vast horizon of Mesopotamia. The prince stands before the vizier, holding his father's sword, ready to end the cycle of the sands forever. The Dark Prince is reduced to a faint, powerless whisper in the back of his mind, a reminder of the darkness that will always exist but no longer leads. The lore of Part 5 is the transcendence of the hero. The prince has survived the physical siege of Babylon, the biological horror of the infection, and the psychological trap of his own ego. He has arrived at the end of time, not as a victim of fate, but as its arbiter. The Tower of Babel stands as a silent witness to the final confrontation between a man who has learned the value of a single lifetime and a monster who has lost everything in his quest for eternity. The final movement of the saga takes place atop the apex of Zervan, a platform suspended in the eye of a golden hurricane where the laws of mortality no longer apply. The vizier, now fully transformed into the winged god King Zervan, represents the ultimate stagnation of time, a being who seeks to freeze the world in a state of eternal, unmoving perfection under his rule. The lore of the final battle is a masterclass in thematic resolution. To reach the vizier, the prince must navigate a crumbling environment where the very stones are being unmade. This is the end of the illusion. The vizier's power is shown to be parasitic, built on the destruction of the city below. The prince uses his father's sword not just to wound the vizier's flesh, but to sever his connection to the sands. As the battle reaches its climax, the prince delivers a series of precise strikes that force the vizier to ground, proving that the spirit of a true king is more durable than the vanity of a false god. The death of the vizier is the definitive end of the sands era. As the prince plunges the dagger of time into the vizier's heart, the energy of the sands is released in a blinding flash of white light. In this moment of cosmic equilibrium, the spirit of Kylena reappears. She is no longer the vengeful empress or the hunted victim, but a transcendent being of pure temporal energy. She gathers the sands of time, the dagger, and the dagger tail into herself, removing the corruption from the world once and for all. The lore of Kylena's ascension signifies the closing of the circle. She tells the prince that the sands were a mistake born of human greed, and by removing them, she is giving humanity the greatest gift, a future that is not written in stone. She fades into the ether, leaving the prince standing in a Babylon that is finally, truly free. However, the journey is not yet over. As the physical threat vanishes, the Dark Prince makes his final, most desperate stand within the prince's mind. The prince is pulled into a final dreamscape of the palace, where the shadow attempts to seize the throne of his consciousness. The lore of the Last Temptation is profound. The Dark Prince does not fight with weapons, but with the lure of power. He offers the prince a world where he can have everything back: his father, his kingdom, and Kylena, if only he will let the darkness stay. The prince's victory here is his greatest feat of the trilogy. He realizes that to defeat the shadow, he must simply walk away. He stops fighting, ignores the throne, and follows the voice of Farah toward the light. By choosing to be a man instead of a god, he effectively starves the Dark Prince of the attention and anger that fueled him. The shadow dissipates into nothingness, leaving the prince whole for the first time in years. The prince awakens on the balcony of the palace, the real-world sun rising over a liberated Babylon. Farah stands beside him, safe and free. The lore of their final exchange is a beautiful callback to the series' origins. When Farah asks who he really is and how he knew her name, the prince realizes that while she has no memory of their past, he carries the legacy of every timeline they shared. He is the guardian of the secret history. He doesn't try to force her to remember. Instead, he begins to tell her the story, starting with the iconic words, "Most people think time is like a river that flows swift and sure in one direction, but I have seen the face of time, and I can tell you, they are wrong." This signifies that the prince has found his true purpose, not as a conqueror, but as the storyteller who ensures the mistakes of the past are never repeated. The trilogy ends with the camera pulling back from the palace, showing a city beginning to rebuild. The lore of the two thrones concludes with the theme of acceptance. The prince has lost his father, his original timeline, and the woman he first loved, but he has gained a wisdom that no other mortal possesses. He is the prince of two thrones, the earthly throne of Babylon and the spiritual throne of a man who has conquered himself. The dagger is gone, the sands are gone, and for the first time since he crossed the Indian border all those years ago, the prince is not running from his future. He is stepping into it, one day at a time, alongside the woman who was always his destiny. The legacy of the Sands of Time trilogy is a story of personal evolution. It began with a boy wanting to impress his father with a trophy and ended with a man realizing that the greatest trophy is a clear conscience. The lore of the Ahura and the Persians is left in peace, the cycle of the sands broken, and the river of time allowed to flow naturally once more. The prince has finally earned his rest, leaving behind a legend that will be told as long as there are stars over the desert.